The Battle Hosts. Be a better gamer, build a better community.
Welcome to The Battle Hosts, a podcast dedicated to helping you become a better 40K gamer and to build a better community of players. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight is Sean.
Hello.
In this episode, we're going to talk about 40K, a Grimdark Satire.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about the origins of 40K and the fact that some people miss that it is really a satire.
Yes.
So we'll chat a little about what is satire and some examples of that, but also just in general, 40K paints a certain picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take it too seriously, either one way or the other, you can kind of miss the point, in which case, it's all satire.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to hook into and engage with the themes, ideas of 40K, and some are more, I don't want to say better than others, though I will say I do think some are worse than others, but I think some are more nuanced and contextually appropriate than others.
Yes.
There are some that miss the context. So we'll talk a little bit about both the good ways and some of the not so good ways.
Yeah, and we'll take it all the way back to Rogue Trader, where it all began. And go from there, yeah. And then in our second part, we're going to talk about Warhammer Plus. We'll do a quick review of the Warhammer Plus experience thus far, and then we'll have listener mail.
Yes.
So, okay. Now, before we get started, let's hear a word from our sponsor, TraderA.com. If you're like most Warhammer players, you own a ton of models. At one time, you had big plans for these models, but now they just kind of sit, gathering dust, unused and unloved. It's time to clean out your closet of shame. Visit TraderA.com and get cash for your used models. TraderA is run by Captain A, someone who's been in the community a long time and has done a lot to grow the hobby. He's also a personal friend of the show. Unopened boxes, models on a sprue, half-built models, primed, painted, even bits have value. The process is simple. Send him a list of what you have, he'll send you a quote, you pack it up, send in your stuff, and he'll get you cash. You can shop around, but you're going to find that TraderA gives you 40% more than the other guys. You want it quick, you want to get rid of it, visit TraderA.com. Get cash to buy the stuff that you really want. TraderA.com. Sell your models and get your cash quick and easy. All right, so our main topic, let's talk about Warhammer 40K. So the Warhammer 40K universe kicked off officially in 1987. The publication of their very first edition of Warhammer 40K. It was called Rogue Trader, subtitled Warhammer 40K. So when people say Rogue Trader 40K, that's what they mean. Basically, it was about Rogue Trader. It was written mostly by Rick Priestley, and it kind of set up the universe that we've all come to know and love of 40K, including the Imperium, a dead emperor on the throne, nearly dead, mostly dead, the Xenos races, and warp travel. It borrowed a lot from fantasy, but it was also a reflection of the time and place it came out. And it really was a satirical look at the future.
Yes.
And it is a unique sci-fi setting. Basically, humanity has descended into this future dark ages, where technology is more basically like magic.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way, though, as the editions rolled on, we wonder if the satire seems to have been lost or buried, or some people have not caught the fact that it doesn't just exist as a single universe. It's trying to make a commentary on things. Yeah,
and that focus on commentary or the prevalence of the satire has definitely been eclipsed by some more straight played attitudes towards the lore.
Yes.
Both by Games Workshop and by the fans.
Sure. I mean, it's been around a long time.
Yeah.
And it has changed over the years to
Absolutely.
kind of ebb and flow a little bit. So, the original, I think, was pretty clear, but you're right. The themes and tone have shifted. They have books for preteens now.
Yeah.
So they're trying to broaden their audience a little bit. But I think it's important to point out the fact that at its heart, it's kind of silly and it's over the top.
It is.
It's trying to make a point, right?
Yeah.
But it's also super unique, and I think that's why we love it so much.
Yes. It drew and draws from so many different influences. Some of them played straight, some of them satirical or parodies, that there is very little in the world with the mix of all of these different ideas, concepts, themes as 40K.
Yeah.
In terms of it just covers so much. You want to tell a story, whatever the story is, whatever the genre it is, whatever the setting is, you can fit it into 40K somehow.
Yep. As long as it's bleak.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure there's some world out there where there's a democracy, but for the most part, not really.
Yeah.
It paints a very grim picture, which hence the term grimdark.
Exactly. Yes.
So we were talking before we came up with the idea for this episode. You were chatting about the fact that especially now, and especially when it first came out with 8th edition, does it paint this kind of this rosy picture of what is essentially an authoritarian government?
Yeah. And so this was where my first real pondering on the subject started, was this idea of, has the role of the Space Marine in the lore, not necessarily like what they do, how they fight, but the character they are portraying as a whole. The role in the property, has that changed? And I think it has. Yeah. Space Marines have been pushed further and further towards heroic depictions. Yeah. Right? And they've always been depicted in outsized, heroic, epic proportions, but now they're being portrayed more in that, like, good, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, right? Like, we're not fully there, but we seem to be getting pushed there a little bit. Some of it's Rabot coming back. I think there are a lot of really interesting ideas there, but with him coming back, it's kind of this idea of, we have this untainted Primarch that's from the Golden Age that is reestablishing the Golden Age. We have these new Primaris Marines that, especially before the Indomitus box, were depicted very clean. They almost tactical. They were tying into the more modern looking military equipment. The Baroque equipment was out the door, kind of left in the past. Indomitus brought a lot of that back, which I enjoyed.
Yes.
Now you have a guy with a skeleton strapped to a shield, one of his battle brothers, and another guy's on a banner. That was positive in my view. But really, I started to ask the question, if Space Marines are becoming more and more simplified as just heroes, what does that mean about the Imperium as a whole? How is the Imperium being depicted? And this is a discussion that has been interesting to track online and with people that I know. Just this idea of, like, I feel like attitudes towards the Imperium are shifting. Not to where people are saying the Imperium is, altruistic or intrinsically good. I don't think we're seeing any of that.
No.
But there does seem to be more of a take on the Imperium where it's like a flawed but necessary thing.
Necessary, yes.
And that is always something that kind of triggers I don't know, anytime that I have something described as, well, it's evil but necessary, or flawed but it has to be like that, I go, okay, what are we as fans, what are we as a company, Games Workshop, as a community, are we excusing things here? And so that's what started this path for me in terms of unpacking these ideas.
Yeah. I mean, does it paint so if the Marines, and let's just face it, Space Marines are the poster boys.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
always are. If they're fighting for something and they look cool doing it, and they have a certain righteousness to it, and what they're battling is gross plague marine looking things, or psychotic robots in the Necrons, right? They're clearly battling what's quote unquote a bad guy. Everyone knows. You have these weird questions. It's like, who are the good guys in 40K? And I think sometimes they do it just for the attention, right? Because everyone knows the answer is always, there are no good guys.
Yeah,
right?
It's nobody.
Veteran 40K players know this. So if somebody doesn't know anything about the property, they may go, well, the humans are the good guys.
Yeah.
So then what are they fighting for? And then when you dig a little deeper and you look at some of the imagery, especially some of the really dark imagery of things, then you go, wait a minute, what kind of, what are they, who is this, right? So then it gets a little bit uncomfortable until you recognize that this stuff was meant to be satire.
Yes.
And so once you understand that, then the whole thing becomes, it just becomes interesting, even more interesting. There's layers to it.
Yep.
But if you just look at that surface level, you're like, this is really weird. What a creepy property. Why is everyone really into this thing?
Yes. Yes. And you get comments like that. I see them online of, 40K has a lot of problematic areas to it. And I'm not here to say that it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think some of the problematic ideas that are identified by people not familiar with the property are going to be different from veteran gamers going, here are the actual problematic areas.
Yeah.
Because there is really that, like, once you start getting into the depth of the lore and understanding, okay, what is this satire performing? What kind of a message is it carrying? some of those ideas start going out the door.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not presenting any of this as a place you want to be.
No.
But for most of us, that's why it's interesting. That's why it has so many layers to it. Let's talk about what satire is.
Yes.
Satire is basically criticism, but it's cloaked in humor or irony or exaggeration. In the case of 40K, definitely exaggeration.
Absolutely.
It pokes fun at something. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's both, but it's usually some kind of a social commentary. It can be very lighthearted or funny, or really dark or cynical or serious on the other end. So, The Onion is satire.
Yeah.
And it's clearly satire. Some of their stuff is a little darker than others.
Yes. Like the headline, man who thought he had no hope left finds one remaining shred as he loses it.
Yes.
Right? Like that is very just, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, for sure. But there's other things that are just kind of lighthearted. Like The Onion has some just sort of lighthearted funniness to it, right?
Yep.
In sci-fi, we see lots of different satirical types of sci-fi. Judge Dredd is a comic book that is very much satire.
Yes.
And we'll chat a little about Judge Dredd later. One of the most classic examples of satire is Jonathan Swift.
Yes.
Who's an English author who wrote Gulliver's Travels is one thing, but he also wrote something called The Modest Proposal. And The Modest Proposal was written during the Irish potato famine, when people were literally starving in Ireland. They lost several years of crops, in successive crops, and there was starvation in Ireland.
Yes.
And so Jonathan Swift wrote this thing called A Modest Proposal, where he talks about, and if you haven't read it, it's pretty quick. I think I read it one time in elementary school, and this is when my mind was blown to like, oh, you can do that with writing.
Yes.
Or maybe late elementary or junior high. I don't remember.
Probably junior high or high school.
Must have been junior high,
yeah. But when students first read through it, they very commonly will have it, this is messed up.
Yeah.
Like, why are we reading this? This is horrible.
Yeah.
Which is the point.
It's just the point. Yeah. So the point is, he starts the first half talking about the fact that there's this horrible thing going on. People are starving. And so, but he has a way to fix it. And his way to fix it involves, why don't they just eat their children?
Yeah, I mean,
they
he's
have
thinking
children.
outside the box.
It's his modest proposal. Now, when you read it for the first time, anyone who has a sort of shred of morality is first taken back by it. But then you recognize he's poking fun at, and he's pointing out the hypocrisy of the fact that there are literal people starving and we're not seem to be doing anything about it.
Yes.
Right. And so why the hell not? Why not have them eat their kids? At this point, how much less can we possibly do to help?
Yes.
So he's poking fun at the English. He's poking fun at people the do-gooders of the time, who think that there's things they can help to solve that, but they're not really understanding the gravity of the situation. And he's doing it through exaggeration, and it's a bit of a shock value.
It is. And really, he is not just saying we're not doing anything. He is attacking British policymakers, like London government officials. So one of them is Robert Malthus. He is one of the Queen's advisors. He is a very famous biologist who comes up with the idea of the Malthusian limit, which simply put is species will reach a natural equilibrium with their environment. If they're overpopulated, they'll die off. If they're underpopulated, they'll have a population boom. Eventually, they'll reach equilibrium.
Sure.
Malthus was literally arguing that the Irish were just reaching their Malthusian limit, that they were overpopulated, and that this was a natural process, and the British government should stand back and let it happen.
Yeah.
And keep rents high, keep taxes high, not give any sort of a food aid. They turned away a ship from the Ottoman Empire that was carrying food. I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah.
150 years later, the British government officially apologized for making it worse.
Yeah.
So when he is writing this, he is explicitly going after people like Malthus that are saying, this is natural, this is right. And he goes, well, if this is natural and this is right, you have no issue with them eating their children, right?
Yeah.
That's natural and right too. Cannibalism is natural when people are starving. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
And it is intended to create in the reader this feeling of like, that is horrible.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What, Jonathan, why would you write this? And then he goes, this is what you're doing with your policies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it is very, very targeted. 40K isn't quite that targeted.
No, it's not. And it's not quite that clever either.
No.
And it's not that as specific of an issue.
Yes.
It is very much a product of its time. But that's basically what satire is.
Mhm.
And the reaction always varies. So some people are kind of horrified by it. There are Onion articles where I'm never offended by them. I go, whoa, that's edgy.
Yes.
Some of them go, they cut deep. But at the same time, I get a chuckle out of it because I know what they're trying to go for it. Sometimes people are offended by it or disgusted by it.
Yeah.
Think of the people that might look at 40K and go, oh my gosh, what is this universe is predict? What are they presenting here?
Yeah.
But, others might actually think it's a good idea, and that's even more troubling. We'll talk about that toward the end.
I think that's going to be our last thing about satire.
Yeah.
Right at the end is talking about that kind of interaction with the ideas.
Yes, and so in both cases, the point tends to be missed. But that's what we'll chat a little bit about, like why does it become that way?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because it loses a little bit of its edge. And it becomes less so, kind of like you said, the Marines, when you take away all their weird Baroque stuff, they're just dudes in cool power armor with cool pouches, and they're tactical. And so why wouldn't you think that they're just like any other power armor hero? In the age of Marvel heroes, they just look like another kind of hero.
They do, right?
So
they're
super soldiers,
an
basically.
army of Iron Men, right?
Yes,
like
pretty much.
For the uneducated, well, not uneducated in terms of education, but people that don't know about the universe, when they see Marines, there is no indication on Primaris Marines at this point, outside of, again, some of the pieces in the Indomitus box, that they are or were child soldiers taken from horrible situations.
Yeah.
Most of them earn their place. Now, this is old lore for Firstborn Marines. Primaris Marines depends on the chapter.
Sure.
Depends on if they were one of the test tube Primaris Marines or some other type. But a lot of this is still true for Primaris chapters.
Yeah.
They have gone through some sort of a blood sport tournament.
Yeah.
They've killed another child.
Yeah.
And then they are forcibly tortured, brainwashed, indoctrinated, stripped of their individuality, and then put into a life where a successful life is dying in the service of their country.
Yeah.
That is a horrible setup for any sort of a soldier, but it can sometimes be glorified.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There are some people that have a power fantasy about being a space marine.
Yeah. Yeah.
That has some concerns about it, right? Like, but then there are a lot of people that are, you'll see questions on the internet like, well, you're transported to the last fictional universe you've read about. Where are you? And people will just be like, oh man, I'm screwed. I'm in the 40K universe.
Yeah.
Like I am now a servitor or a serf or
a
cog in a machine. That is really where 40K was originated and pushed for, and where it still is. This is not a universe you want to live in.
No. And I will say that I think that it's funny when we were first chatting about this, you talked about the Indominus box, but even more so now, especially with Warhammer Plus, there's a couple episodes of Hammer and Bolter that really do feel very the old school Grimdark.
Good.
And so they put one out there about the Orcs. To me, that was the least compelling of the other two that they had. The Angels of Death, I mean, they're leaning back into it, which they should, because that's what makes 40K unique.
Yes.
That is what makes them unique.
Yep. Yep. And when we look at the roots of satire, another example of satire, and this one is interesting because it was originally not a satirical work. It was political commentary that the author did not necessarily espouse as truth, just more of a what if. And Heinlein did this a lot.
Yeah.
So Robert A. Heinlein wrote a lot of different books that had a lot of different, like all over the political spectrum in terms of what would a society organized around these ideas look like.
Yeah.
One of his most famous is Starship Troopers.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's also incredibly important because it influences 40K in a big way.
Yep.
The mobile infantry from it are one of the few concepts that really builds into the Space Marine.
Yep.
And when he writes the society of Starship Troopers, it is very militaristic. Enough so that it gets called fascist a lot. And it really does have fascist ideals in terms of service to the state, and military service makes one a better a better member of society and earn citizenship. Yeah. Service guarantees citizenship, those kind of ideas. War is glorifying, or it can be a crucible that makes people better, all of these kind of ideas. Well, the movie adaptation was made by somebody that disagreed with all of the political ideas of the book. And so I am having a hard time remembering the director's name.
Oh, Paul Verhoeven.
Thank
Yep.
you. He does not read the book when he makes the movie because he doesn't want to. Instead, he makes a movie that is in-universe propaganda.
Yep.
The whole idea of the movie is that this is what is being broadcast to the members of the society, and it is a scathing satirizing of fascism.
Yep. Yeah.
Just full-throated. This is fascism on the screen, and this is why it's ridiculous.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the interesting part where you can take a property like his original book was written pretty straight, and he didn't mean it to be a satire. He was really espousing like this is what a view looks like with a militaristic government, which has a lot of fascist overtones. Paul Verhoeven, who's made some interesting, he did Total Recall, he did RoboCop. RoboCop is also another thing. He also did Showgirls, which is unfortunate. Really very boring movie given the subject matter.
Exactly.
But he's Dutch, and he takes no prisoners with his movies, and so he has Doogie Howser in an SS uniform. Sorry, Neil Patrick Harris, who played Doogie Howser. However, they have a lot of young, good-looking people, and he shows what it looks like when they're all worked up to fight for this thing.
Yes.
Called, for their government.
Yeah.
In this case, it's a very militaristic government.
Yes.
That has been encroaching on this species, and at the very end, they're excited because they finally get the species to fear them. That's their thing, right? So I think the book Starship Troopers and the movie Starship Troopers are amazing.
Yeah, for very different reasons.
Very different reasons. The film is clearly a satire. The book is interesting and fun, and it's a very cool adventure story. But if you miss those classroom scenes, that's really the whole point. Like it's wrapped up in this. It's like, what would the society look like?
Yeah. The civics teacher in the book is delivering the political ideas Heinlein wants you to think about.
Yes.
Whether you agree with them or not, he wants you to think about them.
Yes.
What is the value of corporal punishment in a society? What is the value of service and dedication and sacrifice in a society?
Yeah. And Heinlein it's funny because he was really popular when he came out. He's not as popular now. And there are people that reflect back on his work and think that some of it is problematic, including Starship Troopers. But I think it's a little unfair to him because he's written lots of books. He wrote a lot of books.
Yep.
And whether he espoused it or not, his personal beliefs, I think that the book itself is compelling reading, and he's written a lot of good stuff. Yeah. So I went through a Heinlein phase when I was a young man, like as most of us do. Yep. Who are sci-fi fans, and his stuff is good.
Yeah, and it's every book feels like him taking this cultural or political or societal idea and really unpacking what does this look like on a wide scale, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it's so compelling reading for young guys primarily, but just young people, because you really are trying to unpack your own views and beliefs about these kind of things. So it's fun to see these what if ideas, which is really what sci-fi has been from its very early days, are these what if questions about humanity. Yeah. Learning more about humans by creating fictional setups and then saying, what does it look like with humanity existing in that state? Sure. So now when you look at Rogue Trader, what is the what if being asked about humanity in Rogue Trader? Yeah.
And let's talk about Rogue Trader. We talked about it being kind of a product of its time. In this case, it was in 87, so 80s England. Yes. Right? During this time, the manufacturing was on the decline, on its way out. England, from its post-war highs, manufacturing was going away. There was unemployment hit record highs in the mid-'80s. Unemployment was quite high in England. It was like 12%, like in 84, 85.
Yeah, and the government response to a lot of this was austerity. Yes. Slashing, cutting, not extending any sort of a help for these issues, saying like, we're going to need to cut government spending and then this will all work out.
Yeah, because it was pitched as something that was necessary. There were two recessions in the early and late 80s. The unions were kind of gone in England, or the membership was declining, and sort of the free market fundamentalism, that the conservative politics had kind of won. That's what was really of the day. The country was going through a transformation, but with that came a lot of social, cultural, political counter-revolution, and the music was amazing. We're talking like punk from 75 to late 70s, Sex Pistols and Clash and et al. Also the new wave in the 80s. It was a very exciting time. There was a lot of sort of counter-revolutionary spirit at the time too, but it was also a time where it was about, the 80s. We look back fondly on the 80s, and of course I'm an American, and I remember it as a child. It's very much this day-glow thing, but inflation was crazy at the time, and even though it feels like everyone was making money, that's the gloss or that's the shine that is presented. It's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, because there are thousands and thousands that are losing traditional jobs in communities that were built around things that are no longer there.
Yes.
Right? What does that look like to live there?
It was the start of where you could no longer work a factory 9 to 5 and support a family. That was going away. And England just is the same as in this country as well. But from that zeitgeist comes Rogue Trader. It was basically a fantasy setting in space. It was, it had Eldar, it had Orcs, it had humans, it had dwarves. No longer. We don't need the squats back, by the way, as an aside.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of a niche they can fill. That would really be compelling for them.
Yeah.
I will say that they are confirmed. Like, there are a few squats in existing. I think it's Kill Team.
Yeah. The Rogue Trader box set or Black Fortress.
Yeah, that's what it is. Some of these smaller scale games have kind of shuffled them back onto the table. Maybe, I don't know, maybe seeing if there's any sort of interest in bringing them back. I mean, of course, there's always the requests online. And anytime you say bring squats back, it resets the timer, guys.
Yeah.
Just know that.
Yeah.
It
and
pushes it back even
people
further.
do it as a joke at this point.
Yes.
Most people that remember this era, I mean, squats have been around since second edition. So most of them are going to be in their late 40s, 50s at this point that actually care. But anyways... but it was fantasy in space, but it wasn't just your typical fantasy. It had, some of the influences, like we said, Starship Troopers one, Dune was another one.
Big one.
Dune is a huge one. It had like the concept of like interstellar travel, like folding space folding.
Yep.
And it had the Emperor, it had houses and warring houses, and Dune was, by the way, a very, it's not satire, it's very much a ecological, is presenting a future that was really about, this is a planet that's being exploited. The natives are being suppressed. And it was really a call to arms against sort of the environmental damages that were happening at the time.
Yep.
And that's why Dune is timeless to me. And that's why the new movie coming out is going to be super exciting.
I'm very excited.
It's great.
To see
I just reread the book again. Really, really excited for it. But also the 2080 comic book series was really popular back. It still is, but it's a big thing in England. And that's where Judge Dredd comes from. But also it had, influences of punk music. It had influences of the music of the time. It draws from a huge variety of sources to have this melding of fantasy and sci-fi. The art in Rogue Trader is very cartoonish.
Absolutely.
Fitting the style of the time. And you see a lot of strong punk rock influences.
Yes. Mohawks are everywhere. Metal-studded jackets.
Yes. It's very rock and roll.
Yes.
Black and white drawings of just really very much cartoonish, crazy sci-fi universe. But it's sci-fi and it's satire. It inverts that typical sci-fi universe. So it's not Star Wars.
No.
Right? Star Wars is fantasy. Star Wars is the hero's journey. Star Wars is a young man fulfilling his destiny and then learning and growing into this thing. And it presents it's called A New Hope, for gosh sakes. It literally is this good against evil sort of vision of things.
Small underdog defeats evil empire.
Yeah.
That, is, by the way, the British Empire.
But it's not Star Trek. And Star Trek is humanity as utopian society. It's humanity at its zenith. Like, what would happen if we kept evolving as a species? What if we got through some of the things that separate us? What if we kept going? What would a universe of Star Trek look like? The original series, not so much, but more that next generation, Gene Roddenberry's original vision was that humanity had reached a peak. Like we were the best we could be, and we were getting better.
Yeah, originally he didn't want any episode to have conflict.
Yes.
He said this show can't have conflict because they have moved past that.
Yes.
That is how far we are pushing this idea. And you can include Star Trek and Star Wars, I think, in the idea of humanity, not everybody, but it is presented as there's an opportunity for humanity to become more than itself.
Yes.
Right? Like in Star Trek, it's the entire society.
Yep.
Post-scarcity, post-money, post-political strife, humanity as a whole has moved on to something better and greater than what we're used to.
Yeah.
In Star Wars, it's individuals. The Jedi are, more enlightened, more in tune, these kind of an idea, right? And it's Luke growing into the Jedi and gaining wisdom and perspective. 40K takes the opposite direction.
It totally does. Yeah.
What if humans are even more human? What if their flaws are larger and their grandiose natures are more grandiose and their their arrogance is even more arrogant? They're human, but they're more so than human.
That they're better in that they're stronger.
Yes.
But they're more savage.
Yep.
They're more greedy.
Yep.
The worst impulses of humanity sort of exist, right? This is a universe where technology hasn't saved us.
Oh,
it hasn't evolved us. It's a very nihilistic view of humanity. And again, think of the product of the time. We don't look heroic in this universe. We meaning humans, we're all in it for ourselves. The rogue traders are there to make money. Han Solo is a reformed character in Star Wars, right? He's the smuggler with a heart of gold.
He's an anti-hero that grows into just a straight
exactly.
hero.
Think of it if he never did it and became worse. And that's sort of the rogue traders of the universe, right? It's not a universe where you try to change things. You only survive and try to thrive in your own way.
Yep.
And to think about the 80s during that time, when so much of it is changing, how do you get by? How do you survive? And how do you find a way to thrive? And there's a reason why the sort of the 80s is painted as the decade of greed kind of thing, right? I'll talk about a famous movie, Wall Street, by Oliver Stone.
Yep.
And Gordon Gekko is the protagonist of it. Charlie Sheen is, but Gordon Gekko is Charlie Sheen's character, I should say. But Michael Douglas's character, Gordon Gekko, is a Wall Street trader. Eventually is arrested for insider trading.
Yep.
But he delivers a classic speech called "Greed is Good." Now, the whole point of it is Oliver Stone is satirizing this because Gordon Gekko is willing to destroy a company in order to make money. That's essentially what the whole bent of it is. When he says that, you're not meant to necessarily identify with that. You're meant to go, whoa, there's something there. But a lot of people kind of a little bit identify with it. But that idea of you're in it for yourself is very much of that era, and very much when you're satirizing that era, let's just make it the most extreme. Let's make every character absolutely in it for the survival of themselves. Humanity is selfish. We don't understand a lot of the stuff that we do, and we're violent. And if you look at the Rogue Trader artwork, it's all selfish, violent, or they're indoctrinated. They're very much fanatics. They're very much fanatics.
Yep.
But they have the Sisters of Battle in there, and she's just completely decked out in armor with a nun headdress, right? And that's how far we've evolved,
Yeah, it's, a group that is all about, in our timeline, teaching and separation from worldly values and stuff has been pushed so far back into, crusading spirit that they are nuns with guns.
Yeah, they're zealots.
Right.
Yeah. They're absolutely, they're not given guns to defend themselves. They're given guns for righteousness, to smite, and to destroy the enemies.
That is how they worship.
Yes. So that's what 40K is. And it is not meant to present a universe that is enjoyable, or it's not like Robert Heinlein where he's like, oh, contemplate this. This is kind of interesting. What if the society formed this way? It is literally making fun of the time. And it continues to do so. But with third edition, not only was third edition a rule set, but the lore was kind of a rule set too. Or a set. Think about what was the name of the inspector in Rogue Trader that era?
Yeah, I wish I had it pulled up, but generally it is Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau.
Yes.
Is Inquisitor Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau, I think, is the big three names.
Yep.
And he, in the artwork, is a guy with a cowboy hat and a massive beard, a shotgun on one side, and then he's wearing a crazy, almost leopard print coat.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yeah.
fur coat.
Oh, yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is colorful. He is colorful. His bio is insane, and the amount of equipment that it says that he's carrying, and he's a psyker, and you know, he is Rogue Trader personified.
Yes.
Because you are not supposed to take this seriously.
Yes, that's the thing. Rogue Trader had a lot of humor in it. It was funny.
Mm-hmm.
It was a dark kind of funny, but it was funny.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where a lot of it, the second edition introduced chaos, which became a little more serious, but third edition is when it just went full grimdark.
Yes.
The humor's gone. Squats are gone.
Yep.
There's no more squats.
They couldn't find a way to fit him into their new vision.
Yes. And some of those more sillier elements are sort of stripped away. And now it's the reason it's called grimdark is in the grim darkness of the future.
Yeah, the far future. Yeah,
far future is only
and
war.
the third edition is when I think that tagline already existed, but third edition is when that is really grabbed onto and really pushed.
Yes,
because to give those of you that didn't interact with it at all before third, fourth, fifth, when it was this transitionary, by fifth that transition is complete.
Yep,
the orcs.
Yep.
Right? Orcs are the silly faction. People still make a lot of funny jokes, right? If you're at a tournament or just a game night, you're going to hear some orc player yell, wah!
Yeah.
You know, like somewhere across the hallway or across the gaming hall. You know, people talk in Cockney accents with them. They're soccer hooligans. They're literally soccer hooligans. That is what they were written as. Everything had the feel of orcs in Rogue Trader. Not everybody was an orc, not everybody had that, but every faction had that same kind of a like very outsized portrayal of something.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The Arbites in first and second edition are Judge Dredd, but more of them.
Yeah.
And like, you know, wider jaws. You know, like Judge Dredd, but more. You know, like as much as they can. And that's not the case in third edition.
Yeah.
Third edition, they start really tying and grounding these concepts to where we do get Space Marines really developing into these almost tragic figures.
Yeah.
Is how they're starting to be depicted. We're starting to learn more about how they are recruited, how they are made, how horrible it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Imperial Guard gets a lot more in terms of we're not focusing on the Mordians and these other, you know, hey, this is a British army, but you know, in this time period or that time period. Now we're starting to get the focus on Cadians.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're meat grinder troops that we're really going to play up that emphasis on. They hit the ground and they're dead in 15 minutes, right? Those kind of ideas.
That World War II common soldier kind of feel. Yeah. It became serious.
Yes.
And again, satire can be serious too. It doesn't have to be funny. But when it's a little more serious, it becomes it becomes more difficult to detect it.
Mm-hmm.
So for an example, we talk about Starship Troopers between the book and the movie, but let's talk about Judge Dredd.
Yes.
Now the comic book is really, really colorful. It is not a dark future, whatever. The Judge Dredd, the character, his entire outfit is very much ridiculous. Now, Judge Dredd, for those of you who don't know, it is again a far future, a horrible one, where most of the Earth is irradiated, but there's a Megacity 1, Megacity 2, and these are huge cities. Basically, take Boston and New York and just combine it into one massive city that's walled off from the rest of the country. It's all irradiated wastes. And in this future, things have gotten so bad that they have what's called the judges. And the judges are the judge, jury, executioner. They're the ones that maintain order because, quote unquote, it's necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Judge Dredd comic book was written as a satire of fascism because Judge Dredd himself has a massive shoulder pad on one side, a massive eagle on the other, a helmet, he's faceless. And it's very much a world where an ape can be voted mayor, right? There's some humor to it.
There really is.
The gangs are really funny, but goofy at the same time. It is sort of poking fun at this fascist society because it has literally judges that there's no system of juries or law, judges.
No due process.
There's no due process, exactly. So that's Judge Dredd, the comic book. It's very easy to see kind of what it's trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Judge Dredd, the movie.
Yes.
Not the Stallone one.
Yeah, hot take here. Stallone's version, not saying it's a good movie.
It's probably more like the comic.
It's probably more like the comic. It hits closer to it.
It does, because there's silliness in it, just like the comic book. Dredd, it's just called Dredd, with Carl Urban, is a great movie. but it's played straight.
Mhm.
Like his uniform looks cool. It doesn't look goofy. It doesn't have some of the exaggerated effect of the comic book.
Mhm.
It is him in a hablock and he's fighting, and it's very much like a very classic survival tale. But he is as Dredd is really, he's cool. He's a tough character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Judge Anderson in the comic book is she's kind of like she's funny, she's quirky, she pokes fun at Dredd all the time.
Mhm.
In the movie, she's a rookie,
Yeah.
and she's trying to learn her way.
Overawed, kind of has to grow into being a true judge, making these hard decisions that is portrayed as good for her to do so.
Yes.
Like
yes.
this is not bad. It's not her succumbing to a broken system. This is Anderson growing into the hero that she has to be to exist in this society.
Yes. Now, to be fair, they don't really get into a lot of the government of setup and stuff. They just say Dredd could be anybody, right? In a lot of cop movies, there's not a lot of quote unquote due process, right?
No.
It could have been set in this era for that matter.
Yeah, it could have been Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, or could Lethal Weapon for that matter. I mean, things like that. So, but Dredd is very much plays it straight. It's not really satirical so much as it is a really interesting, cool movie set in an interesting universe.
Yeah, and I love it. I love the movie.
Yes. Yeah, I do. Then you go, well, what are they trying to prop up? But then you go, no.
Exactly.
You realize that it's there for the interesting, it's trying to present, it's like Heinlein's book. It's trying to present an interesting future.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily making a value judgment one or the other. It's just presenting something that is different. And that's kind of where it goes for. So if it loses the humor, sometimes it loses some of it. It's not satire anymore. It's merely presenting an interesting fictional universe.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
and it's a good movie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it.
Yep.
Really great action movie, very self-contained, all
Sure.
happens in this one building. But yeah, I mean, the ideas of it, it's not poking as much issue at the judge setup,
Yeah.
at his ability to be judge, jury, and executioner, literally. And even though it is such a visually interesting movie, actually probably because of how engaging it is visually and the sound, and they have these slow-mo clips in it that are just beautiful, that actually undercuts some of it.
Yeah.
If you were able to get that kind of satire out of it, well, now you're actually just wholeheartedly engaging earnestly with these very cool like set pieces and all these cool scenes. Makes it a little bit harder to take an idea out of it like that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. That's not what they were going for, but it does change what the property, what the Judge Dredd or 2000 AD property is doing.
Yes. It's very unlike the comic, for sure. I will say, though, that I guess thinking back to Heinlein's book, Starship Troopers, he goes to great length to have chapters, classroom settings where he discusses the government. The movie Dredd doesn't do any of that.
No.
It's just simply a sci-fi universe. Boom. Here you go.
Yeah. Heinlein does do one thing in Starship Troopers that I love. Right at the very end of the movie, or at the end of the book, he has the main character speak Tagalog, which is a language spoken in the Philippines. And it's not until that point, he hasn't mentioned the race of Johnny, right?
Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny. Hasn't mentioned Johnny's race at all. It's not until the very end of the book that you realize that he is Filipino. And that was Heinlein actually kind of taking the wind out of the sails of white nationalists that would use his book as kind of this fascist white nationalist calling.
Yeah.
Nope, Johnny's not white. He's Filipino.
Yeah.
So I love that moment in the book. But
yeah, for sure. And it's Dredd the movie doesn't have nearly this many kind of undertones.
No.
The only what they have in common is they take it seriously. Versus the comic book or the movie Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
Because in the movie they're all white.
Yes, they are. They step straight off of an Aryan recruiting poster. Yeah. Right? Like they are the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, chiseled jaw, gorgeous women. Just in general, they're stepping straight out of the propaganda, which is on purpose.
Who are brutally murdered.
Yes, they are
in the name of the
state.
That's what Verhoeven does.
Yes.
So third edition, it become third through fifth. So the storyline advances though with seventh, and then kind of in seventh, but in eighth edition, the storyline of 40K advances. So the protagonists are kind of fighting back, and this is where we get that heroic. Gilman comes back. The chaos threat. It's very much Imperium versus the chaos factions.
Yeah.
It lost some of its gothic overtones. This is the kind of tactical look.
Yep.
Some of the grimdark story was kind of set aside. So it's not even as grimdark anymore. It's more heroic. And I think this is where things get a little bit, from the very beginning when we just talked about this, things get a little bit problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Because problematic's not the right word. It's some people can look at it and not recognize the origins of it and go, oh, okay, these are cool guys in power armor, great. Once you start to dig into it, you go, okay, this is weird. What is this universe they're fighting for? They're fighting for some weird authoritarian system, blah, blah, blah. Then it becomes like, it's more like the Dread the movie, where they're doing it, it's just presenting this edgy sort of universe of survival at that point.
Yeah, in Dread the comics, I'm going to go ahead, or in 2000 AD, I'm going to continue this analogy because I think it can really inform what 40K does.
Mm-hmm.
The crime and social unrest is because of how terribly run Mega City 1 is.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the government creates these issues by having all of these corrupt flaws and all of these different things. In the movie, it feels more like the judges are necessary because crime has gotten to such a big... It's kind of swapped.
It's swapped,
right?
Yep.
And then in 40K, we're kind of seeing the same thing, right? It goes from the Imperium creates all of its own problems, which is the core of the Imperium, all the way back to the Emperor.
All the way back to the Emperor, the way
he creates all of his own problems.
Through every edition.
Yes.
Like that has been a constant. It has never changed.
The Imperium's greatest enemy is the Imperium.
Yep.
Because their horrible administration, their Byzantine politics and internecine warfare and corruption, all of this is tearing them down.
Yep.
Well, when you simplify it as 8th did, 9th, as we've discussed a little bit, is starting to really walk some of this back.
Mm-hmm.
But 8th started to simplify it down to just chaos versus the Imperium, chaos with the
a two-faction, good versus evil,
right?
Kind of thing.
And it starts to look a lot more like that.
Yeah.
The Cicatrix Maledictum, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
I can never quite remember that correctly. With that splitting the Empire, and you have now the Imperium Nihilus and chaos is everywhere. It feels much more, and I've read more of this, the Imperial abuses of their own citizens are necessary, is a way that you can start to take some, not in the original lore and not really in the lore now, but some more surface level readings out of this is like, well, chaos is such a threat that they have to execute everybody that's a heretic.
Sure.
Or they have to execute everybody that is of some sort of wavering loyalty because they're such a threat. It's necessary.
Yeah.
And that's when it starts to get, okay, are we still connecting with the same ideas that 40K was constructed with, and that it's built on the foundation of a fascist government is not efficient.
Yeah,
it is not efficient.
Yeah.
And that is a myth that has been perpetrated in a lot of ways. Like you get the idea like, well, Mussolini was a terrible leader, but he got the trains to run on time.
Yeah.
Factually, he didn't.
No.
They had a horrible transportation
None
issues.
of them didn't, yeah.
But even more than that, this idea that like devoting a massive part of your own spending to oppressing your own citizens is very much not efficient.
Yes.
Spending massive amounts of your own money to imprison your own citizens and then exterminate them is not efficient.
Yep.
Right? And the Imperium is built on that idea. It is unpacking the idea that fascism and not caring about your citizens will do more damage than it does good.
Yep. Yes. And so when you're right, when you sort of strip away some of the context, or if you don't look for the context, and you look at the box set, it's like, okay, it's this.
Yeah.
When you start to read more of it, you recognize how deep it goes, but it takes some effort to get that context.
Yeah.
And until you get that context, it's really just guys in power armor fighting weird, gross dudes, plague marines, or robots, which is probably fine. Because then you're not really thinking too much of one way or the other. But when you start to explore the universe, you really have to understand that humanity is there are no good guys.
Yeah,
none. Yeah. The Eldar aren't good. No one's good. Tau, no one is good.
Yeah,
they've made great pains to show that is the case.
Yes,
and like you said, the government, the humanity is its own worst enemy, and that's been a constant throughout.
Yeah.
Recently, the Sisters of Battle, or the Adeptus Sororitas, kind of went back to their roots. Right, when they
Which is
released
good,
that
yeah.
line, it's like, okay, let's put church face on there. Let's get crazy church organ stuff. Let's
Mhm.
go Baroque, full Baroque,
Yep.
wild stuff. AdMech is creepy, right?
Yes.
They went way off into the creepiness of AdMech.
Body
you know?
horror
Yeah.
and like crazy, contraptions and stuff. I really love them pushing those themes further.
Yes, and so the Grimdark is making it more so. So I actually think that it was a bit of a misstep to release the Primaris. I don't know if they would go back and do it again, to be honest. I don't even think the lore is that great.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a bit of a misstep in that they were a little too clean.
Yeah, the Dark Imperium Primaris.
The Dark Imperium
Yeah.
Primaris. But
Yep.
the Indominus set is kind of like, okay, now we're back.
Yeah.
It's weird that the lore really hasn't evolved since then, right? We really haven't heard much from... There was the Vigilus campaign was the last kind of thing. But it was kind of like Gilliman's coming back. He's going to fix everything, right? He's the ultimate. He's going to fix sort of the Imperium.
Mm-hmm.
We need to hear more about how the fact that he can't. No one can.
Yeah.
Like, which we kind of know, but we really haven't.
They're bringing it in somewhat, I think, with the sequel to Dark Imperium.
Yeah.
Because the Dark Imperium book that we did the book review on absolutely had this issue where Gilliman and the Primaris Marines are just straight up heroes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're divorced from the Imperium's issues and their corruption and their flaws. They're not part of that system. I think the sequel starts to bring that back in a little bit. We get more of Gilliman realizing, like, I mean, even in that first book, he's like, this is horrible. But now even Gilliman is starting to have to sacrifice some of his own ideals.
Yes.
Right. He's starting to have to tap into the idea that I guess I do have to run with the idea that I'm a demigod to get people to listen to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're getting back there. But to return to something that you were talking about, I think here's what I want to talk about. There is a worse way to interact with these ideas than others. If you are not interacting with the ideas or themes of 40K at all, absolutely, that's great.
Sure.
You want to just buy the models, paint the models, they look cool,
They're
play
interesting.
the game.
Yeah.
Awesome, right? Like, it's a visual thing, it's a hobby thing, it's a game thing, that's great. If you want to read 40K lore deeply and be thinking about these ideas and thinking about the satire and commentary and what this what if is asking you to decide about humanity, that's awesome.
Yeah.
If you're going halfway, and you are taking the message of the Imperium, but that's from the Imperium at face value, that is when I won't say that you yourself are performing something that is damaging to the community. I don't think you are. But what you are doing, if you are looking at the Imperium and saying, the Imperium is horrible and evil, but it's necessary. I think that's a somewhat defensible statement that in that, it's very easy to start trying to pull out all of this data, or from the universe, like chaos, corruption, and gene stealers, and look at all the, they need a secret police. The issue is that when you go halfway and you start to open up discussion in the community in that way of this is necessary but evil, you are opening a bridge to connect to people that are going to engage with the universe and say, this is good. Not this is evil, but this is something that should be glorified.
Sure.
And this is something that I've experienced myself with discussion online. I saw somebody that said, the fascist ideas, they were extolling the fascist ideas of the Imperium. And I'm going to be honest, I play a lot of different games where, whether it be video games or hobby games, where some element of the game is somewhat attractive to a authoritarian, or a racist, or a xenophobe, or a white supremacist,
especially when it paints a less than rosy picture of it. Because then for most of us, there's an edge to it that makes it interesting, right? We like to kind of dance around it. We like to understand it, and not. We like to engage with it as sort of a fictional property.
Yes,
that's what the interest lies.
Yes,
but when you engage with it and you start to believe in it, that's where the problem lies. And 40K is at more risk of this because by satirizing fascist ideology and really honestly history so directly, fascism was designed to be marketable. That is a core part of fascism, is that it is designed to be around extravagant displays of power, of
having a sense of community even, you know, like it was created a lot.
Us versus them.
Right,
It's
us
very much
versus
like
them.
Yep.
Created by ex-veterans that were looking for, in world, you know, after post-World War I, they were looking for a social structure that they could engage with,
Yep.
that they felt disinherited by, you know, society at large. That means that it is attractive.
Yep.
Fascism is attractive. There's a reason Hugo Boss's SS uniforms are so enduring in terms of being the bad guy's uniform.
Yeah.
Because they have this look to them.
Yeah.
And that is on purpose. That was not on accident. The displays of the Nazi party having thousands of flags and soldiers marching in step and, you know, loud displays and cheering and yelling and chanting. That is all on purpose.
Yeah.
And that makes it very easy to find the Imperium visually attractive.
Sure.
You know, like aesthetically attractive.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I play Dark Angels.
Yeah.
Dark Angels are one of like the bad guy Space Marine factions.
They're the
right?
grimmest of the grim.
Yeah, we're horrible. We're horrible faction, and I love it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like my personal successor chapter is that, but even worse. They're the wetwork specialists that go kill Imperium guys that have maybe seen the Fallen, right?
Yeah.
And I enjoy that and I revel in it, but I also keep it in context that I would never want to exist in a society where the Dark Angels are even a possibility.
Yeah.
And there are people that want to exist in a society where Black Templars are a thing.
Yeah.
And they want to be a Black Templar and they want to do these things. And it's not that I am saying that if you are half engaging with the themes, you are that person. But you need to understand that sometimes you say things ironically and somebody says it back to you unironically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I'm going to get on my soapbox here and say that by not having the context of the full context, you are opening the door to people that will hijack those ideas and use them to preach hate.
Yep. Yeah.
And
now it's a very small portion.
Absolutely.
But they're online.
And they're loud.
They're loud or they're subtle enough that you're not quite aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or there are people that are kind of, I will say, playing with fire in a way in some of the things they kind of engage with. And I'm not saying that engaging with 40K doesn't lend to this.
No.
Obviously, you would have to have some level of this already.
Yeah.
But this turns some of that on for people that already have it. And it's enjoyable for them to engage with it in that moment, right? Or that way to do it.
Yeah. And there have been very public negative reactions to things that I think the vast majority of us would find as a positive.
Yeah.
The Warhammer is for everyone announcement was both predicated and made necessary by the action of some of these people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then the negative reaction to it was the vitriol level online that we could see online was astounding.
Yeah. And it's whether they reacted negatively to that statement or whether they reacted negatively to the idea behind making that statement. I can see there's some criticism there. I can see that. It's like, well, you're only making this statement because of this, or you're trying to cater to the audience, whatever. I mean, there's that as a semi-legitimate, but that to me, if that's not enough of criticism to bother making it verbally online anyways, right? There's no, okay, well, all right. Even if it's a token thing they released, whatever. I mean, sometimes the actions outweigh whatever the intent is.
Yeah. And this is a general question about like corporate activism in general.
Sure, exactly, right? And so that's what people sometimes look at that and go, oh, God, another company is doing,
Yeah, and if that's your reaction, that's valid. That's fair.
Sure, that's
right?
fine.
Like,
but there's a reason they put that out there. And it had nothing to do with some of the minor things that people like. When I say minor, I mean there's a lot of things about 40K that can be problematic, and there's things that the universe can try to do. But I think it is always going to be a grim, dark universe.
Absolutely.
And there are people that are really worried that it's going to lose it. I don't think it is.
No.
And if it may have started to, but I don't think it is. Like, not at all, because judging by the Hammer and Bolter episodes, judging by the Indominus box set, judging by a lot of that stuff, it's not a heroic it is leaning back into that.
Yes.
Which to me, I like more, because then it's like very clearly presenting a ridiculous situation. Humanity is barely existing at this point. And I think that it presents it has enough edginess there to be a satire when I think it's called we want it to be at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gets harder to engage with the satirized ideas earnestly when it is cranked up to 11.
Yes.
That cranking up to 11 makes it harder for you to go, oh, well, there are some good ideas here.
Yeah.
Because you're going, oh, ooh.
No, there's no good ideas
No,
here.
no.
None. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that too, we talk about there are some people that miss the point because they might criticize 40K as a weird authoritarian power fantasy.
Yeah.
Look at the iconography, the imagery, the Black Templar's cross. You go, oh, what is this horrible? You could be offended by it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
If you're easily offended, you could be offended by this universe that is presenting. But these are the people that read A Modest Proposal and were grossed out by Jonathan Swift and just thought he was serious.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the other flip side of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can miss the point in that way as well. So if you take it and you just realize it, if you realize it's a satire and it is presenting humanity as an awful place to be,
Yeah.
and nothing it presents is a glorification of anything.
Yep.
It is simply the situation that it is in, that there is only war. It just feels better, and it is the 40K that we grew up with,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we're getting back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And while you have that understanding, also carry the understanding that it is a product.
It is a product.
It is a visual product that is meant to be sold.
Mhm.
So there will be very cool design elements
Yep.
that are engaging and interesting and make us want to paint them and look at them and make stories for these characters. But that doesn't mean the characters are good.
No.
That doesn't mean the characters are not horribly flawed.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yeah.
we can really like Space Marine characters, but never forget that they are Sparta's child soldier system taken to an extreme.
Yep.
Right? Like
Yep.
Sparta's child soldier system already terrible. Space Marine's even worse.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it is able to carry both of those.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah.
Which is a power of 40K. It can be very visually interesting and exciting and engaging
And
while
unique.
also-
Yeah.
absolutely unique. Even though there's a lot of discussion online about how much of 40K is copied, quote unquote, from other things.
Sure.
That's part of the beauty of 40K is
Yeah.
that it's not just Dune.
Yeah.
It's not just Starship Troopers. It's not
Yeah.
just 2000 AD. It's all of those and 17 things besides.
Yeah.
Which makes it so interesting.
Yeah, and it's cranked, like you said, it's cranked to 11.
Yeah.
Like it imagines a universe where there's no happy endings.
No.
And there never will be.
No.
Right. But it's not just being edgy for edgy's sake. Right. I mean, you look at it and you go, oh, this is such an edgelord universe, right? It's ridiculous, right?
Mhm.
It's trying to make it's a commentary on the worst parts of humanity
Mhm.
rather than the best. And not just humanity, everybody, every race, the worst parts of it. Like whatever that race is, again, it's all cranked to 11.
Mhm.
I think Tau were presented as originally supposed to be kind of like an interesting, almost an idealistic race,
Mhm.
but they've painted them back to being like, well, kind of, but the ethereals are sort of, there's a little bit of mind control there.
Secret police.
There's a secret police thing. They went back to, okay, it's not that great.
No.
So
No. Yeah. And my final point about it would be the Emperor's Imperium was a golden age in terms of technology and
Mhm.
conquest, but it was not a golden age in terms of human rights.
No.
Or, for a lot of the people that were conquered, their life got worse, not
Yeah.
better.
yeah,
The Great Crusade was not about improving the lives of the everyday
Yeah.
human. And so when we look at the Imperium of the 41st millennium, it absolutely is a shell of what it once was,
yeah.
but that doesn't mean what it once was inherently good.
Even what it once was itself a shell
Yes.
of something else.
Yeah, of the dark age of technology. Right?
There was apparently some point in the 40K universe a time when the humanity was at its zenith,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know anything about that,
Yep.
and they keep that completely in the dark because even in 30K, it's taken over old technology that we barely understand.
Yep. And
So-
the Emperor causes all of his own problems.
It truly does.
Every
Yeah.
single one.
Yep.
He could have been a better dad. He could have been a better leader. He could
Yep.
have not made deals with chaos. All of these different things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
What we don't want to do is sort of come across as these are things you have to know. Because again, this is really trying to paint a picture of the depth of this lore.
Mm-hmm.
This is, if you were not aware of the origins of it, we hope that we have given you some of that to understand kind of where it came from and why it is the way it is and why it is so unique.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say, well, if you didn't know this, there's a problem. No, it's it's really about trying to really unpack some of the layers of 40K, and the fact that at the end of it, it's just a commentary on the fact that sometimes humans just suck.
Yeah, and having that context can really deepen the enjoyment of it.
I think so.
Right? Like when you learn about the Mantis warriors and the tragedy of them, offending, or not, is it the Mantis warriors? Oh,
the
man.
Lamenters?
Well, the Lamenters are just unlucky. What is the chapter that is targeted by the Inquisition?
The Celestial Lions.
Yeah, so in Spear of the Emperor and just in the lore in general, the Celestial Lions are a Space Marine chapter that stands up to the Inquisition at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Inquisition decides to make a example of them.
Yep.
And for the rest of their existence, they are just plagued by the Inquisition hampering them, making a point out of it. But what ends up happening, I mean, the Celestial Lions are defending the Imperium.
Yep.
So they'll be in a battle, and then a inquisitorial sniper will kill one of their officers and cause a bunch of them to be killed and play it off as like an orc sniper or something like that.
Sure.
And that is weakening the Imperium.
Yep.
As well as creating tragedy for the Celestial Alliance. If you are a Celestial Alliance fan, or the Spear of the Emperor does this perfectly, where there is such a sense of lost opportunity and potential.
Yeah.
And that is where I would say, like, really engaging with these ideas make it more interesting to read lore, because you really get that reinforced, this lost opportunity, lost potential, what could have been.
Yeah.
It makes it even more grimdark.
There's a lot of, sometimes you see, well, what happens, kind of the what if scenario, what if humans teamed up with the Eldar and did all that? It didn't matter. They wouldn't, right? The lore prevents any of that. It prevents any kind of like good things coming about of this. Yeah. And again, going back to Gilliman and the Primaris, I think that's one of the reasons why for a lot of veteran players and a lot of people that really like the lore, it felt like a weird about face. Like, wait a minute, Gilliman's going to come save things? That's nothing in that. That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
He goes out and he kicks out the High Lords of Terror and he does all this cool stuff, and he's going to save the Imperium now, and because he's the ultimate bureaucrat and he can fix things. Well, but that goes against the spirit of the lore, and I think they backed away from that.
And they did. And now they took it one step to where it got back to 40K, where even the best bureaucrat to have ever lived can't fix the Imperium.
Yes.
Right. And that's the true note that it lands on. That's good.
Yep. So no matter what you are, you're not going to be able to change things in the 40K universe. Even if you're an orc, even if you have the biggest wah ever, there's always going to be another bigger orc. If Eldrad is the best farseer, he can see the future. He still can't see the demise of his race.
Yep.
There's these moments of things, but I think that those moments of quote unquote hope are there only to move the story further and to present more of a compelling antagonistic relationship between two different forces.
Yeah.
Because technically it's been a minute to midnight. They had to move the story along. Well, how do we make chaos seem like a bigger threat? How do we make the Imperium more able to stand up to it? I think they're raising the stakes without really raising the stakes, because no one's really dying. But they're just simply trying to move the universe forward without really making major changes. Because I think, again, at its heart, 40K satire.
Yep, it is.
That's it. So thanks for listening to Battle Hosts.
Remember to be a better gamer.
Yeah, there you go. And build a better community. Good night.
Good night.